One of the most annoying things when you're planning to bring your camera and your gear abroad is knowing what to bring with you. If you bring too little, you might forget something that you really need, and you'll end up having to buy a replacement on the go or just do without it or be really frustrated. But then if you bring too much stuff, on the other hand, you end up with a gigantic heavy bag that you're lugging around everywhere, which is also super annoying and frustrating to deal with. So you need to figure out that balance of what you actually need to bring with you when traveling and what you don't. Now, luckily, I've actually done this whole travel with a camera thing with film and digital cameras multiple times, so I can actually show you a few things that I think are really quite useful. Behold my stuff. So this is all of the camera gear that I packed on my last trip abroad. It was to Japan again because of course it was. Where else am I going to go? On this trip I was focusing on shooting film and digital, but I was also trying out a few new ideas for making kind of on-the-go videos. And that's why I've got a few extra bits of gear this time around. So let's start with what everyone's actually interested in, and that is of course with the cameras. So the digital camera I brought with me was of course the Nikon Z8. I think this is the finest mirrorless camera that you can buy right now. I don't think Sony or Canon even have anything that can come close to touching the Z8. It is, in my opinion, the perfect digital camera. It's reasonably sized for what it does. It's high resolution at 45 megapixels. It's fast. It does 8K 60 raw video. It does internal ProRes. It does internal compressed, 10-bit, 422, 8K, 4K, 6K. And it is basically, in my opinion, the jack of and master of all trades. I have never come across a single situation in portraiture, in landscape, cityscape, wildlife shooting that this did not handle effortlessly. It just worked every time without even breaking a sweat. It is just, I think, the greatest digital camera ever made. Now, in fairness, for travel, the Z8 is kind of big and bulky. It's not an issue for me because I'm able to haul it around, but yeah, it can be kind of big. If you don't need the high-end video features, I use Z7 with 45 megapixels might actually be a better choice if you're just taking stills for traveling. But if I do any kind of like wildlife stuff, the Z8 really does outshine it. But overall, probably the perfect camera. My primary lens for travel is of course the 24-120 f4s lens. This is my general purpose all-day walk-around lens for taking snapshots, quick pictures, landscape, cityscape, zooming in into 120 and then cropping everything to get some wildlife shots while I'm on the go. I think this is a perfect walk-around lens. It's reasonably sized, it's not too heavy, it's very sharp, has very good autofocus. The f4 aperture can be kind of limiting, particularly at night. For the size and weight, it's actually really good. Now, speaking of aperture limitations, I do bring a fast prime with me. In this case, I'm bringing the Nikkor 35mm f1.8 G lens. I think this is a great lens for just sort of walk around and night shooting when you really do need that extra stop of light. It's plenty sharp, for me anyway. I know the 35mm Z mount version is much better, but I actually think it's physically a bit larger than this and a little bit heavier than this combo, even with the adapter. But I've had no issues with this F-mount version at all. And having a faster aperture when you want to shoot at night is always good, because no matter how good the image processing and how good the low light performance is in the camera, you just can't cheat physics. And then lastly, I have a very specialized lens, so if I'm traveling to any kind of city or I'm planning to do like cityscape or landscape shots, I always bring my 24mm tilt shift lens. This is obviously a very highly specialized lens. Not everyone's going to have or want or need one of these things. I really like this lens. Having tilt shift capability is just so useful for travel and any kind of, cityscape or landscape photography. It's just great having it. It's an incredibly useful tool to have with you. This 24mm, I've actually modded it and rotated the mount 90 degrees so that the shift and tilting axes are aligned, because by default they're at 90-degree offsets. And if you're doing landscapes, you often want to shift the lens up and down while also tilting the lens up and down. And normally, you can only shift up and down and tilt left to right. The Nikon PC lenses don't have the ability to rotate between the two axes, although I believe the 19mm does, which is one of my coveted lenses, but they're like $3 used. One day I'll own that 19mm, but for now I've got the 24mm tilt shift. Because it's me when I'm traveling, I'm going to bring a film camera, and for this trip I brought the Bronica ETRS. Now I actually have the 40mm lens mounted on it. I didn't have this on the trip. I was using the 50mm MC lens, which Had some issues with image quality and softness. I did stop it down a lot though and got away with it, I think, in most situations. But yeah, I brought this because I wanted to shoot medium format 645 on this trip. And with 15 shots a roll at 645 and the increased resolution over 35mm, I think this was actually a really good camera to bring with me, and I really did enjoy using it. I shot a couple of color negative rolls, a couple of rolls of color slide, and I even shot some ECN2 65mm motion picture film in this camera this time around. Of course, the ETRS doesn't have a light meter, so I used my absolutely lovely Reveni Labs Spot Meter 2. I did a review on this like 6 months ago, and I have to say it still hasn't let me down. It's a lovely little meter, fits in the pocket of my bag. It means I don't have to bring my big Pentax digital spot meter about, which I think overall is a better meter than this, but for travel or compactness and usefulness, and the fact that you can buy these new and they're much cheaper, I think the Reveni Labs spot meter is arguably the best spot meter that you can buy right now. I really enjoyed using this meter with the Bronica. Now, of course, when I'm traveling, I also bring filters. So I tend to bring the same set of filters with me everywhere. For when I want to shoot video, I do bring a variable ND filter with me. This is very useful because I tend to shoot a lot of ProRes N-Log in the Z8, and it has a base ISO of 800. So having an ND filter like this is actually critical to be able to get the shot at all if you want your shutter speed to be somewhat reasonable and not, you know, 1/2000th of a second. Now, when I'm traveling and I'm taking pictures during the day, not just during the golden hour, I always bring a polarizer. And having the ability to remove the reflection of the sky off your landscape and increase your saturation and contrast in your landscape shots during the day. The only issue with bringing these two filters is that if I want to shoot photos then video, I often am swapping from the polarizer to the ND and back. Also, when I'm traveling, I bring a couple of solid ND filters, generally like a 2-stop, a 4-stop and a 10-stop. So I'm able to get some, you know, longer exposure shots when I want to. Now, of course, because I like shooting video when I'm traveling, I do bring a few smaller cameras with me. And this time I brought 3 small cameras, and we're going to start off with by far the best one. And in fact, I think it is the best travel video camera you can buy right now. And that is, of course, the DJI Pocket 3. It just slaps everything else out of the water. It does 4K 60, it can shoot in 10-bit log. It also has a mechanically stabilized camera with that gimbal and a beautiful 1-inch sensor. Even though a 1-inch sensor is kind of a weird thing to say, it's actually a 13.2mm by 8.8mm sensor. It uses 1 inch because some archaic old TV tube measurement would be theoretically an inch size if the sensor was this size. It's a really stupid measurement. It's a 1-inch sensor. And of course, because this camera is mechanically stabilized, it means you can always shoot at the optimum shutter speed for video to get nice motion blur, and you can shoot at any time, day or night, and it produces amazing video every time. Now, to pair with the Pocket 3, I do actually have a set of ND filters. These are solid ND filters with a circular polarizer, although I do have a K&F Concept magnetic ND filter here in the case. And the filter just magnetically locks on like that. Now, one issue with this is because you can't adjust the polarization of the ND, if you're trying to shoot through like a window, let's say of a plane or a train, you can get weird rainbow effects. One set of filters I would like to get is a set of polarized ND filters, so you have the ability to do polarization during the day to get, you know, better color, while also having the ND effect. And you can adjust the polarization so you don't have the weird issue of the rainbow effect on glass and weird reflection problems. Next up, we have the DJI Action 4. This is a very recent pickup and it's the first trip I brought it on. I did use this a fair bit. It was a really useful little camera. It's particularly useful for when I was getting driving shots. And to be honest, there's not much to say about it. It's an action camera. It's exactly what it says on the tin. The thing that's nice about this one is that it has a low resolution 12 megapixel sensor with larger pixels, so it tends to perform better in low light. Stabilization's really great when it has lots of light. If you try and use stabilization at night, it kind of just fails to stabilize properly. You get weird jittery artifacting. But overall, Action 4 is a great little camera to use. I have it in a small rig cage to keep it protected and because I like having my camera in a cage. And the last little video camera I have is the Insta360 X4, the latest of Insta360's higher end 360 cameras. And I have to say, this camera is a bit of an enigma for travel. When you need a 360 camera, if you're in a situation where the 360 camera works really well, these work exceptionally well. The problem is that if you're in a situation where you don't need a 360 camera and you could get away with using something like an action camera or the Pocket 3, it is always better to go with the action camera or the Pocket 3, because the footage out of this requires a lot of post-processing, it requires a lot of work and a lot of editing to make it look half decent. You know, I often have to use AI upscalers to gain extra resolution because you're cropping in so hard even though it is an 8K image. And there's a bunch of weird limitations on this camera. There are some shots that are just not possible without using something like this time-lapse of Shibuya Crossing, where I had this mounted to a pole and I was able to get some really interesting time-lapse footage with this. And that really wouldn't have been possible with the Action 4. You know, having the 360 with its ultra-wide field of view and the ability to crop in later meant that I could just plonk this magnetically onto a pole, set it to time-lapse, and it just recorded away while I kept an eye on it. Having a 360 camera is quite useful, but is by far the least useful out of these three cameras. A new addition to my video kit this time around is these Deity TC1 timecode boxes. I've been playing around with the idea of using a timecode based workflow in order to synchronize all my cameras for travel. The jury's still out on whether it's a good idea. All signs seem to be pointing towards yes for now, but I will be making a video in the future on using timecode. So next up, we're going to talk about the mounting hardware. And first up, we have the magnetic base mount for smaller cameras. So I use this when I want to get a B camera shot and I want to mount like the action camera or something on a pole nearby. So all I need to do is lock the camera in, and then this is a magnetic base, so I can just, you know, clunk it onto a light pole or something and get a secondary camera shot really easy. I find this to be a really good gadget. I use this a lot, particularly in the head of cities where I was mounting the 360 camera to like different light poles to get time lapses and such. So I'll definitely be bringing this magnetic base with me in the future as well. It's a mini tripod. This is the small rig one. This is useful for, like, you know, if you're in the airport, you want to do a time lapse through glass or something, or if you're driving in the car and you want to mount a camera on the dashboard easily. It does the job. It's made by Small Rig. It's all metal. Exactly what it says on the tin. I don't need to talk much more about that. So as for my actual travel tripod, I used to have a beautiful Peak Design travel tripod, but unfortunately I lost it on a trip. I left it down on a street in Tokyo and I came back the next day and it was gone. I didn't even realize I'd forgot it until the following day. I asked in like the train stations and, you know, the police station or the Koban nearby, different shops, and nobody had handed it in, so I can assume somebody walked off with it overnight. This is its replacement. It is the iFootage Gazelle TC3B. It is a very nice travel video tripod actually. But yeah, overall I really like this tripod. It's carbon fiber, it's very small, it's very light. The only disadvantage of this one is that it doesn't actually have a center column at all. So it can be quite fiddly to get it to the right height, and it does limit the height of the tripod quite a bit. There have been a few cases where I've had to put the tripod in a non-optimal place because I couldn't extend the center column to get a little bit of extra height. Pretty good tripod, and for the money it's actually a pretty decent value, so, you know, 7 out of 10. And of course, lastly, in terms of mounting hardware, we have my favorite piece of gear for when I'm traveling, which is, of course, the clamp. So this is one of the most useful pieces of gear when you're traveling, because this means you don't need to have your tripod with you at all times, but also because this can be used in places where tripods are not allowed. So on this trip, I was photographing Asakusa from the Tourist Information Building, and they have this like 8th floor viewing gallery area, which is really nice, but they forbid the use of tripods. However, they don't forbid you from using a clamp to mount your camera onto the railings, and that allows me to get lovely long exposure shots at night from the viewpoint without using a tripod. And I have to say, this clamp has saved me more times when traveling to get certain shots than probably any other piece of gear. It is so goddamn useful. So of course, when you're traveling and you've got your camera and you've taken all your amazing pictures during the day, you've recorded all your video and all your little cameras, you've got all your angles, you've got all your audio, you know, you've used your clamp to take your night photos, and you get back to the hotel that night, and now you want to back up everything to make sure you don't lose any of it, and you need to recharge everything. So first up, we have the Jupio TriCharge, which is a really useful device. And I have to say, even though this is kind of expensive for a battery charger, it is just so goddamn useful that I absolutely love this. So this is a USB-C triple charger for Nikon ENEL15 batteries. I do believe there is a version for Canon and Sony as well. But this holds 3 Nikon ENEL15 batteries in it. And it charges all of them at one single USB-C port, which is incredibly useful. It actually has a USB-C out port. So this can actually be used as an emergency battery bank to keep your phone topped up, which I have had to use a few times because the battery of my phone has gotten really bad lately. And if you're navigating with Google Maps, or if you're logging your location so you can tag your photos later and you're burning through your phone battery too quickly, you can actually keep it topped up with your camera batteries, which is really quite good. It also has a bunch of slots on the back of it for holding various cards. So because this is the Nikon version, this holds CF Express Type B cards. It also has space for SD cards as well, and slots for micro SD cards. So this is a really great little device to have, and it just keeps everything nice and tidy all together. You can just pop this in your bag and away you go for the day. Next up we have my battery bank. I use this one by Basis. I think it's called the Blade. It's a real nice slim battery bank so that it fits neatly into the pocket on the plane in front of you, which is honestly where this gets the most use because it keeps my tablet charged up when I want to watch movies on long flights. And it's also nice and slim and fits into like small pockets on the bag really easy. Now when I'm traveling, I normally bring my big multi-port charger with me. However, in my hand luggage when I'm traveling, I also bring this 20-watt charger. And the reason I like this is because it has US plugs, EU plugs, and in fact, it also has a UK plug as well on it. So now once we've got back to our hotel room and everything's charging, we need to back up all our data. And to do that, I have this, which is my tablet. This is the Minisform V3 tablet. It's a 12.5-inch full Windows machine. So this is basically a full thin and light Windows laptop, but in a tablet form. So the reason I picked up the Minisform V3 over other tablets like the Surface Pro is because this has dual 40 gigabit USB-C ports, which makes a huge difference when you're transferring all the files from your SD cards and CF Express cards onto your SSDs. So speaking of copying data from cards, the card reader that I'm using is this Freewell Pro multi-card reader. And as you can see, you have 4 card slots. So you've got a micro SD card slot, you've got an SD card slot, which of course with an adapter allows you to copy 2 micro SD cards at the one time, which is really useful when you've got a bunch of small cameras. You also have a CF Express Type A slot, which I don't use because none of my cameras use that. And you have a CF Express Type B slot as well. So not only is it a really good fast 10 gigabit card reader, it also has a bunch of slots for storing extra memory cards. So it has 6 slots here for micro SDs, 2 SD card slots. And then on the other side, it has a CF Express Type B slot, CF Express Type A slot, and another SD card holder as well. Not only does it have memory card slots, it has a space to put your SIM card when you're traveling, which is really useful. And then what I do is, in the airport, I actually take the SIM card out of my phone entirely, pop it in here for storage, and I actually put a little bit of gaff tape to make sure it can't fall out by accident. And this means that my SIM card is nice and safe until I get home, which is really useful. You can actually see I still have the Japanese SIM card that I used while I was traveling still in here. Now the big downside of this card reader is that the USB-C cable is actually attached to the reader itself. I would have loved to have seen a USB-C port on the bottom of the reader so then I could use my own cables. Over time this cable will eventually break and this whole thing will become scrap. So I really do wish they'd put a USB-C port on it. It would be really nice in the future. And of course lastly we need somewhere to back up all of our data too, and that is where these bad boys come in. These are both 4 terabyte SSDs. This is the Crucial X9. It is a 10 gigabit SSD. This little SSD is lovely. It's super fast. It's super high capacity. It's also quite tough with its metal shell. And it has been with me around the world a few times now and it has never failed me. On the other side we also have this 4 terabyte SSD, which is actually just an enclosure holding an M.2 4 terabyte SSD that I put in here. So it's a little bit of a different form factor. This is a Sabrent's 10 gigabit case. It's super fast, it works really well. It's metal, it's nice and tough, and it keeps the SSD nice and protected while I'm traveling. Now the reason I bring 2 high capacity SSDs when I'm traveling is that one of these stays in the hotel room at all times, and one of them stays on my person at all times in my bag. And this means that if something really bad happens, like I fall in a river or something, and I lose all the data on this SSD, I still have a backup in the hotel room. But it also means if the hotel room gets broken into and a bunch of my stuff gets stolen, I still have a backup of all my data on me at all times. So I always keep 2 copies of my data when I'm traveling. And that is one of the reasons why I like having the 40 gigabit ports on the tablet, is so that when I plug both of these SSDs in, I can copy the files from one to the other super fast. The Surface Pro 6 was limited to 5 gigabits in total, which meant the copying speed was only like 250 megs a second from one to the other. Meanwhile on this, I'm easily able to break 800 megabytes a second, which makes backup super fast, which is really nice when you're in your hotel room and you're absolutely knackered and you need to go to bed, but you need to do your backups for the day first. So yeah, 2 super fast SSDs, 2 super fast cables, and nice fast tablet, and fast card reader just to keep everything backed up nice and neat when I'm traveling.